Good evening, folks, and good morning to wherever you are in the world. And you might know us from the comment section of the group. I am Vidit, this is Mark, and we are going to be talking about the basics of Stoicism. I am a seeker. I don't know much about the academic side of the philosophy, but Mark has a little more experience than I do. So I'm going to be asking him questions, and let's see where it goes.
Stoicism is an ancient Greco-Roman philosophy, started in Athens with Zeno of Citium. It eventually moved on to Rome, so it becomes a Greco-Roman philosophy. And the three main authors we have are Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, of course, Epictetus, and Seneca. Those are the texts that we have the most amount of. But we have some other was in Cicero, who was not a Stoic, but liked Stoicism quite a bit. As far as what that's its history. As far as what it is, it's a philosophy in the same way that it's like a way of life. It's a way of being in that sense of philosophy. It is also a academic sense of philosophy, but it is something that is supposed to change the way you think, to change the way that you live your life. Um, as far as why it's popular now, uh, it's just kind of some people are going to gravitate towards it just because of who they are. It's also just more commercial at this point because of the state of the world, and people are selling it. Um, there's a lot of reasons. Some people are going to find it useful. Some people won't. I happen to be one of those people that finds it useful. Not just useful. I find a lot of it to be true. But yeah.
So when you say you find the lot of part of the philosophy to be true, I was talking to James just now. He said that embodying the philosophy is a very Greek thing. So to
Yes.
me, I would say that I was quoting, I said that I am looking at all the philosophies and I am taking out the salient features. And to take out the salient features, you have to embody the philosophy, because without embodying the philosophy, you will not understand the philosophy. I was
Right.
coming at it from a very Hindu sort of perspective, that we are taught from a very young age, the vocational teaching that goes on, that you have to imbibe it, you have to do the act itself, or to understand what the true meaning of it is, because you cannot read between the lines just by reading the text. So when you say that stoicism has an academic side to it and a practice side to it, can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah. So I'm an American, so I'm gonna come at it from a cultural Christian perspective and an American cultural Christian perspective. Here in America, we kind of think of, and I know that's religion and philosophy. There's a fine there's not a fine line between those two in my mind. But in America, our Christianity is very focused on beliefs. If you have the right beliefs, you are a good person. Um, and that's a broad generalization. But so you can believe that uh, uh, murder is wrong and you're a good person as long as you don't murder. But that those two connect. Like you can believe that murder is not wrong and still murder. So you have to not murder. Those two have to go together. And to be a bit crass, Stoicism is basically, if you change your mind, your ass will follow. Like if you turn your head, you will go the way your head is turned. So those two things, you have to change your mind first and then go uh, in that direction. You have to orient yourself in the direction of the philosophy, if that makes sense.
So it is getting the right perspective of things. I've been told it's a body of knowledge.
Mhm.
Correct. So it has three parts. As I've only ever with you guys, when we've talked, when we've discussed it with the members, when we've had long debates, even in the admin chat and everything like that, I we have always discussed, as far as I remember, the ethics side of Stoicism.
Mhm.
There is also physics, and there is
Yeah.
also one more branch that I'm completely forgetting.
Logic.
Logic.
Yeah.
All right, I'm very bad at modal logic, and I'm just going to put it out there. If anybody watching this knows modal logic, please teach me. I do not know it.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not a logician either, and I'm especially not a Stoic logician. Um, but uh, but we can get into that a little bit if you want.
so correct.
But I do know the physics fairly well, and I know the ethics fairly well.
So it's that is my question. That is where I'm coming from. So if we are limited by our perception, and Stoic ethics, as I understand it, tells you what is right in the world and what is wrong in the world, and what not so. I should not be talking in absolutes. It is more regards what should be your personal duty and what should be your duty to the society and to the society's duty to you, something like
Yeah.
that. I see stoicism as a very hierarchical, very it's a very it has become a very romanistic kind of philosophy, because it has that structure, that hierarchy, that sort of militaristic approach to teaching, sort
Mm-hmm.
of kind of thing, the learning kind of thing. But my question would be, what parts of stoicism, what part of the logic, what part of the physics, and what part of the ethics help you shape your reality, and why is it compared to
Gotcha.
repressing emotions, is my
Why
main.
is it compared to what now?
Repressing emotions.
Okay. So let's take this apart. So the logic is there to not only like figure out what's right and wrong or what's correct and incorrect, but it's there to set the mind in the proper right. It's if you think of like it's you want to have the right answers before you change your mind. You want to have the correct like the good answer. You know, you don't want to have a bad answer. You don't want to use fallacious thinking. Um, uh, you just have to have your mind set properly. Um, so in that sense, the logic not only is um, it's not just there to debate or whatever. It's actually to change how you think.
All right.
The physics for the Stoics is it's monism. It's uh, it's
Monotheism.
it's it's we are all. This is getting a little technical, but the whole,
Hmm.
the universe,
Hmm.
comes before the parts, which are so. Um, as an analogy, before I have a fingernail, I have to have a finger. Before I have a finger, I have to have a hand. You
Hmm.
know, until so I am a whole being. I am one whole being.
The universe is one whole
And that
being.
goes back to the universe. I am just
Hmm.
a part of the universe. I am not an individual
Hmm.
separate from the universe. I am part of the universe. And there's a theology there, and that's a big debate in there, whether or not the Stoic God is different from scientific theories and things of that sort. Um, then the ethics is a virtue ethics.
Hmm.
It's about character.
Hmm.
It's about wisdom, big W wisdom, and all its components. And the virtue ethics is also wisdom is monistic. It has parts, but there's wisdom and then there's components of wisdom. So they are all interrelated.
Understood.
Does that make sense?
It makes a little sense, but it makes sense to me because you've been sharing so much reading material with me over the last 1.5 years. To break it down for the audience, Stoicism, Stoic ethics, that is the
Mm-hmm.
only part I understand. This is a disclaimer, that is the only part I understand. Yeah, so Stoic ethics basically has four cardinal virtues, right? Courage,
Right.
wisdom, temperance, and justice.
Mm-hmm.
I was told recently by you and Jason that all of these four virtues are sub virtues.
Yeah. Mhm.
and they work in tandem to make the right character.
Yeah.
So you have to use courage with justice, with temperance, with wisdom. If you do not
Yeah.
act in wisdom and only act in courage, you will end up doing something that is against the virtue ethics theory
Right.
that we read in Stoicism,
Right.
as I understand it.
Yeah.
So, if you talk about the big writers, like the big three that you detailed, which is Seneca, which is Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, two
Mhm.
of them existed parallelly, as much as I understand, Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus.
They they don't quite overlap, but they're almost at the same time. I think there might be a little bit of overlap, but Marcus was probably very young. So Epictetus comes first and then Marcus, yeah. And Seneca is a little bit earlier.
All right. So I've also read that Marcus's teacher, the guy who was hired by the emperor to basically groom a young Marcus, was a Stoic, was a person from the Stoic school itself. So
Yeah,
if the wisdom did not flow directly, it must have flown indirectly. The Epictetus to the school to Marcus Aurelius
right.
himself. So you said something the other day when we were discussing about this video. You said that Marcus Aurelius is essentially restated Epictetus.
Yeah. Hmm.
Why did you say that? Can you give me an example?
So if you read the Meditations as a book, as a novel, like
Hmm.
in chronological order, it gets rather boring because he repeats himself several times. He repeats the same concepts several times.
Hmm.
That's because it wasn't written like that. It was written as a personal journal where it was a form of Roman literature where it's like a personal diary, but it's a philosophical diary. So he is writing that stuff. He is writing Stoic concepts to himself to to keep him on task of being a good person.
He was counseling himself.
What's that?
He was counseling himself.
He was counseling himself. He was going through. He's like, "Hey, I'm having issues with this, so I'm going to write out what I remember from Epictetus in my own words about death, about family, about love, about whatever concept he needs to work on." So he is structuring that in his own words, a lot of Epictetus. It's about 60% Epictetus, I would say. That's a rough guesstimate. I haven't actually done the work. But uh and and then there's also other concepts in there. So it does repeat itself because he's going through the same problems every day. He's dealing with people that he finds ungrateful. So he writes a passage about this jerk that he's dealing with. He's missing his wife. So he writes a story. He writes something about how just because he misses his wife doesn't mean that's a bad thing. He has to, he doesn't want to get up out of bed. So he writes a thing about how he has to get up out of bed and do the work of a human being.
Were you born in the? Did you come into this world to huddle under the
Right.
covers or do your work? Yeah.
Yeah. So he's rewriting those things, his understanding of Epictetus to himself to keep them at hand so he can use them in his life. He's not doing philosophy as we think of it, where it's like I'm making a proposition and I'm going to prove that I'm correct here about this certain. He is counseling himself. He is treating himself. He is doing a form of self therapy. I should note that Epictetus, what we have of Epictetus, his handbook, and there's a Greek word for it, which I can't pronounce because I'm not uh, Enchiridion. I think I just tried to pronounce it. And then we have the discourses. The Enchiridion is a handbook. It's like 100 and some like little passages that are like what Marcus is doing.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
He's just like, you're supposed to keep these in mind. And
Hmm.
then the discourses are his lectures, like one of his students wrote down his lectures. And so it is very much a dialogue with his students.
So, like you touched on a point, which is like philosophy is giving a proposition and then trying to basically, in
Right.
the scientific method, trying to disprove it or trying to prove it. So, going about that, was ancient Greek philosophy, was Stoicism like that too? Is the discourses structured like that? Because I have not read it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lecture, but it's a lecture. It's more of a discussion. You can get bits and pieces of what the discussion was in the discourses. Um, so it's not like it wasn't like a big lecture hall where the Epictetus was at the board. It is like more akin to a small discussion group, and he has a lecture, but people have questions and he might answer them. So it is in that dialectical in like the Socratic dialectics dialogue form. Yeah, so it's not logical proofs and done like that. It is, but there is some very nice logic in there because he knew his logic. So you can pick apart the logic if you want.
I understand. So it is more of him uh, teaching others what he already knows, what he has
Hmm.
embodied in himself, and what he has practiced for years and years, and he's just talking about it. So it comes through his natural flow of conversation.